Tyrone Bowman live. I want to talk about an article that I read in the Wall Street Journal. It's very apropos for what's happening and what's going on right now in wake of the ICE raids and protests that's going on in Los Angeles, California, in an article written for the Wall Street Journal by Nancy A. Youssef, Annie Linsky, and Michael R. Gordon. So according to the Wall Street Journal, roughly 700 Marines are being dispatched to protect federal personnel and property over the objections of California Governor Newsom. Roughly 700 Marines are deploying to the Los Angeles area to protect federal buildings and personnel in the wake of protests over immigration that have already led President Trump to federalize National Guard troops, the U.S. military said Monday. The troops, which are assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division out of 29 Palms, California, won't engage with protesters, so they say. U.S. Northern Command, which is responsible for U.S. military operations in North America, said in a statement a senior administration official told reporters on Monday evening that the move came in light of increased threats against federal officers and federal buildings. So who are the threats coming from? There have been no news reports about officers and federal buildings being threatened. There have been no reports about protesters trying to hurt anybody. So where are the threats coming from? You know, ladies and gentlemen, we have to be careful about information that we continue to get, and it's just thrown out there. But there are no credible sources to back it up. There's nobody to repudiate the falsity of it. Most people just believe what they hear. They don't care where it comes from or who it comes from, as long as it's what they want to hear. So the unusual decision marks the first time in more than 3 decades that Marines have been sent into a U.S. city to address civil unrest. It came over the objections of California Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom, who has called the federal intervention an intrusion on state sovereignty and vowed to sue in response. Quote, they shouldn't be deployed on American soil facing their own countrymen to fulfill the deranged fantasy of a dictatorial president, end quote, Newsom wrote in a message on X. The troops, which could arrive in the Los Angeles area as soon as tonight, will be under the U.S. Northern Command. The Marines are among the troops, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said over the weekend were prepared to deploy. This is going to get ugly, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to get nastier. And you know what? People are going to be killed. Yes, people are going to lose their lives. And the sad thing about it is, once people are killed, you're going to have deranged people on the right who will even celebrate it and be happy about it. Of course, they'll lie and tell you this is what we voted for. You're a liar. This is not what you voted for. Federal agents arrested several immigrants during a targeted operation on Friday, igniting protests that quickly spread across the city into neighboring Paramount, where agents conducted more arrests. Despite Newsom's public insistence that the situation was stabilizing, Trump ordered National Guardsmen to Los Angeles on Saturday night, ignoring the governor's warnings that an uninvited federal deployment was, quote, purposely inflammatory, end quote, and risk escalating tensions. But it is unclear how long the Marines will deploy, what kind of weapons they are authorized to carry on their specific orders. The Marines are not being sent there to hold hands. Now, I have a brother who's a Marine, and I've had some frank conversations with him about things I wouldn't even talk about on this camera. And I'm telling you, whenever the Marines are sent on a mission, they're not there to talk. They're not there to be friendly. They are prepared for whatever, and whatever can mean anything. Ask a Marine, without them going into detail, when they are summoned, when they are deployed, they come prepared for battle. They're not conversationalists. They're not friendly. They're not going to shake your hands. They come for action. A statement by the U.S. Northern Command said that 2,100 National Guard soldiers and around 700 Marines will protect federal personnel and property under the command of Task Force 51, the headquarters that has been assigned the mission. The forces have been trained in de-escalation, crowd control, and standing rules for the use of force, the command said. A presidential order issued Saturday by Trump directed the Pentagon to use the National Guard and, quote, other members of the regular armed forces as necessary, end quote, to protect federal, quote, functions and property, end quote. The last time Marines deployed to quell civil unrest was during the 1992 Los Angeles riots. Now, you all that are old enough to know, if you don't know, go look it up on Wikipedia, go to some of the websites where you get your information from and find out what happened in 1992. And those riots erupted after 4 white police officers were acquitted in the beating of Rodney King. They beat him into an inch of his life and left him for dead. And they tried to justify the brutality that they inflicted upon the now deceased Rodney King. It took 2 trials to get these officers acquitted. The first trial, they had it in a venue outside, I think it was in Simi Valley. If anybody knows anything about Simi Valley, that's a lily white, all white, rich place. Of course, you knew they were going to be found not guilty. And he tried to justify the brutality that they inflicted upon Rodney King in 1992. And people got tired of it. They got tired of it. President George H.W. Bush acted after he received the request from California Governor Pete Wilson to help contain the violence that erupted after the acquittal of the police officers. Let me just say this, cops are not always right. They're not Almighty God. They're human beings. They make mistakes. They get it wrong. Lots of times. They're quick to rush to judgment. Their personal biases always come to light. And just because they have qualified immunity doesn't make them a deity. It doesn't mean that every decision that they make is right. They have unjustly murdered hundreds of thousands of people. You know how many corrupt cops there are in law enforcement? And then when they get caught, the standard up is, well, that's just one bad apple. The vast majority of law enforcement officers are working hard every day. That's a lie. They're not just one bad apple. There's corruption running through law enforcement like water is running through the ocean. But nobody wants to address it unless it's happening to one of your children, one of your relatives, and the brutality and the injustice comes to your doorstep. Then something must be done to stop it. So, and I'm going to say it again, it's going to get terribly, terribly, terribly hideous out in California. So in this instance, Trump didn't invoke the Insurrection Act, a 1792 law that allows the president to deploy the U.S. military domestically in some instances, such as putting down civil disorder or a rebellion, but instead appeared to authorize the deployment under the weekend executive order. National Guard troops are part-time soldiers assigned to a state and are usually under the governor's authority. Active duty troops answer solely to the commander-in-chief, and their focus is on defending the U.S. Trump, who won his re-election campaign on a pledge to crack down on illegal immigration, has embraced fights with Democrats who have said his tactics go beyond his constitutional limits. Of course, you know the Wall Street Journal is a very white-owned, conservative, pro-MAGA newspaper. So they're not going to say anything negatively toward this administration. The U.S. officials have said the role of the National Guard and Marine forces in Los Angeles will be limited. The broad nature of the order has sparked concerns that it could also be laying the foundations for future military actions against protesters elsewhere in the country. Okay, let me say this here. Then why haven't the Marines and the armed forces been dispatched down in the South where the KKK is marching, where the Proud Boys and all these other white racist extremist militia armed groups are? Nobody has said anything about them. They've been applauded, they've been celebrated. And all you hear is about white liberation, white this and white that, and blah, blah, blah. Think about it. Because that's what's acceptable. That is becoming the norm in America. And you all had an opportunity and a chance to do the right thing, and the vast majority of you all, now you're somewhere complaining, saying you regret your vote. You regret your vote. We don't want to hear that crap now. We don't want to hear it. You had an opportunity, and you did what you did because of racism against Kamala Harris. The Los Angeles deployment also comes on the heels of other steps in which Trump has used his executive authority to push the boundaries of using troops on U.S. soil. Those include authorizing active duty troops to detain migrants in newly created military zones along the southern border, using U.S. bases as detention areas, and flying detainees out of the country on U.S. Air Force planes. Quote, "This is Trump's dream," end quote. Representative Seth Moulton, a Massachusetts Democrat who as a Marine officer served multiple tours during the war in Iraq, said Monday. This is exactly what he has wanted to do, turn the military against the American people. Donald Trump has never respected what Marines do overseas, but has always wanted to use them to force his political agenda at home, close quote. It is rare for a president to send National Guard troops or active duty military to a state without an explicit request from a governor or invoking the Insurrection Act. Remember the Vietnam War? I'm quite sure some of you who watch my program, you might have been involved in the Vietnam War. It was wrong then. The late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in one of his last speeches at the Riverside Church in New York City, gave what will probably go down in history, one of the greatest anti-war speeches of that era. And they said he was wrong to address the issues regarding Vietnam. And how many people today who served in Vietnam, they are hooked on every kind of drug that there is. Many of the veterans are homeless who fought in Vietnam. Many of the veterans can't get Medicaid, can't get Medicare. They're treated like garbage and trash. And they were out there fighting a war that they really knew nothing about. They come back to America. Isn't it ironic that black and white people could die on the battlefield, but come back to America and face segregation? Isn't it ironic that the veterans today are still fighting for veterans' rights? They're fighting for veterans' benefits. They're fighting to get the proper medical care that they need and they can't get it. Where do they send them to? I think they send them to the Veterans Hospital. And that's a place where a lot of people don't want to go because they know they're not going to get the care that they need. President Lyndon Johnson federalized the National Guard and sent them to Alabama to protect protesters marching from Selma to Montgomery in 1965 without a request from the state's governor. Johnson invoked the Insurrection Act. Yes, President Johnson did. Why? People were being killed. Protesters were being killed. They were being lynched. They were being murdered. Simply for just standing up for what they believe was right. And many people will go along with any and everything as long as it doesn't affect them. As long as it doesn't come to their town, their city, their state. As long as it doesn't affect their family. You know how many businesses are going bankrupt right now? How many farmers cannot get people to come work on their farms? How many housing projects have come to a grinding halt? The economy is tilting on disparity of every kind. When you and I go to the store, the prices are jacked up 4 and 5 and 6 times the amount. And you're saying this is what you voted for? That's what you want us to believe? You're trying to convince us that this is what you voted for. And active duty troops were used by President Dwight Eisenhower in 1957 without permission of the state's governor. I understand the position that the writers for the Wall Street Journal is taking here. I understand why they keep saying without permission, without permission. You got to understand the narrative. I'm a criminal justice major. I can read, write, and understand the English language perfectly. Don't just let somebody tell you something. Do your own research. Do your own studying. Pay attention. And those troops were used to uphold a Supreme Court ruling that segregated schools were inherently unequal, which enabled Black children to enroll at a previously segregated school in Little Rock, Arkansas. That experiment didn't go well. And I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. Desegregation was the worst thing that could ever happen to Black America. It destabilized the Black economy. It destabilized Black families. Undestabilized. Yes, it did. It destroyed it. It destroyed the Black economy. It destroyed Black businesses. It destroyed Black families. Of course, Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, claimed he didn't know where he was going and why he was there when they showed a picture of him clearly in the midst. He knew exactly why he was there during that time. I'm not saying he's the worst person on the face of the earth. At least be a man and stand up and say, you know what? I was intelligent enough. I knew why I went there. Nobody's trying to demonize you, but stop being a liar. You know, people do a lot of things for political expediency, and all these people are friends, y'all. This is what you all don't get. All these billionaires, they're all friends together. They hang out in the same clubs. They make deals on the golf course. They're constantly on the telephone, night and day, talking to each other. They're not going to go against their best interests. And to my Black brothers and sisters, don't get upset when you don't see high-profile Black athletes not taking a stand. They're not going to take a stand and jeopardize their money. They're not going to take a stand and jeopardize their celebrity endorsements. You saw what happened to the former quarterback of Colin Kaepernick, crusader, activist. He was totally blackballed. How did the blackballing come? Through the telephone. Don't you give that in a job? And all the owners agreed. Because they all think alike, walk alike, talk alike, act alike. So don't think that Black athletes are on our side. They're not on our side. They're concerned about their money and their lifestyle, their celebrity, and the things that they are doing. Where's all this headed? I'm going to tell you where it's all headed. They want black people out in the streets to be murdered. They want them protesting. They want them arguing with cops. They want them fighting so they can try to justify their actions. When you see mothers get killed and you see their children get killed, live and in living color, you're going to think twice about calling yourself MAGA. Never surrender. Never quit.